Imagine standing in front of a stone slab carved thousands of years ago, covered in mysterious symbols that held the secrets of an entire civilization, symbols that remained unreadable for centuries. This isn't just a scene from a museum, it's the reality that scholars and explorers faced until one incredible discovery changed everything. The Rosetta Stone didn't just unlock ancient Egypt, it gave us the key to hearing the voices of pharaohs, priests, and everyday people who lived in a world we can only dream of visiting. And today, you're going to join that journey of discovery, not as a distant observer, but as an active participant in unraveling one of history's most captivating puzzles. Welcome to the ultimate Egyptian hieroglyphs decoding challenge. This isn't about passively watching history unfold, it's about stepping into the shoes of those first decipherers, feeling that thrill of connection across millennia, and discovering whether you can read the writing of the ancients yourself. We often see these elegant symbols in movies or textbooks, but how many of us have ever truly tried to understand what they say? What if you could look at a cartouche and recognize the name of a ruler, or glance at a temple inscription and grasp the prayers etched into stone? That moment of understanding is more than educational, it's magical. It bridges time and culture, linking us directly to the hopes, beliefs, and stories of people who walked the earth long before us. Throughout this video, we're going to dive deep into the methods, the mistakes, and the magnificent breakthroughs that finally cracked the code of Egyptian hieroglyphs. You'll learn not just how it was done, but how you can start recognizing patterns and meanings yourself. We'll explore the role of the Rosetta Stone, the clever deductions of scholars like Champollion, and the common pitfalls that beginners face and how to avoid them. This is designed to be interactive, immersive, and deeply rewarding. Whether you're a history enthusiast, a language lover, or someone who simply enjoys a great intellectual adventure. So get ready to see ancient Egypt in a whole new light, because by the end of this, you might just be able to decipher a message that hasn't been fully read in over 2,000 years. To truly appreciate the challenge of deciphering hieroglyphs, we need to journey back to the very beginning, to the banks of the Nile over 5,000 years ago. Around 3,300 BCE, something revolutionary happened. The ancient Egyptians, a society already highly organized and sophisticated, began to develop a system of writing. This was not born out of a simple desire to keep grocery lists. It emerged from a deep administrative need to document ownership, record offerings to the gods, and commemorate the deeds of their kings. The earliest examples we have are not lengthy texts, but small labels and tags attached to goods in royal tombs, using simple pictures to denote quantities and places. But these simple pictograms, these little drawings of a bird or a wave, were just the seed. Over centuries, this system blossomed into one of the most intricate and beautiful scripts ever conceived. It evolved far beyond mere pictures representing objects. A hieroglyph could stand for the object it depicted, for a sound related to that object's name, or even for a broader abstract concept. Think of it like this: a simple drawing of a bee could mean the insect itself, or it could represent the sound bee, which you could then use to spell out a completely different word like belief. This combination of sound-based and meaning-based signs is what makes the script so complex and so brilliantly flexible. The Egyptians themselves called hieroglyphs medu-neter, which translates to words of the god. And that name reveals everything about how they viewed this writing. They believed it was a divine gift, a sacred technology bestowed upon them by the god Thoth, the deity of wisdom and writing. To inscribe these symbols was not merely to record information, it was a magical, religious act. Carving a person's name into stone ensured their legacy would endure for eternity. Writing a prayer in a tomb invoked the protection of the gods. The very act of writing held power. This sacred status meant hieroglyphs were reserved for the most important contexts: temple walls, royal monuments, and magical texts designed to guide the soul through the afterlife. They weren't used for everyday memos. This was writing for the gods and for eternity. This mystical significance is a huge part of why decoding them is so profoundly fascinating. We're not just translating words, we're unlocking a mindset, a cosmology, a way of seeing the world where symbol and reality were deeply intertwined. The challenge for centuries was that the system's very complexity and sacred nature worked like a perfect lock. With no living tradition of how to read it, and with the script falling out of use entirely by the 4th century AD, the meaning of these beautiful, enigmatic symbols faded into silence, waiting for the right key to turn. So how did this intricate script actually function on the page? To crack the code, you need to understand that a hieroglyphic inscription is far more than a collection of pretty pictures. It's a sophisticated system that operates on 3 distinct levels, working in harmony. Think of it as a form of ancient multimedia, where a single symbol can convey an image, a sound, and a category of meaning all at once. The key to decipherment lies in recognizing these 3 types of signs: logograms, phonograms, and determinatives. First, we have logograms. These are the signs most people picture when they think of hieroglyphs. A logogram is a symbol that represents an entire word or concept directly. It's a picture of the thing itself. For example, a simple circle with a dot in the center represents the sun, and it means just that, the word sun. Similarly, a drawing of a man with his hand to his mouth straightforwardly means the word eat. These are the most intuitive signs to grasp, as they work exactly like the emojis we use every day. A picture of a sun means sun. A picture of a heart means love. But if the system stopped there, it would be incredibly limited. You need a unique symbol for every single word in the language, which is simply impractical. This is where the second type, phonograms, comes in, and this is the true genius of the system. Phonograms are signs that represent sounds, not things. The ancient Egyptians took a massive leap by realizing that the sound of a word could be broken down and represented by symbols for other, more concrete words. Let's take that word for sun again. In Egyptian, the word for sun is Ra. Now, the logogram for sun is a circle, but the sound Ra could also be used to spell out parts of other, completely unrelated words. So you might see the sun circle used not to mean the sun, but to represent the 2 consonant sounds R and A. This is the alphabetic principle at work, though the Egyptians never developed a pure alphabet of single letters for every sound. Instead, they used a core set of uniliteral signs, hieroglyphs, that stand for a single consonant sound, essentially their alphabet. But they also had biliteral signs representing 2 consonants, and even triliteral signs for 3. For instance, the basket hieroglyph represents the 2 consonants K and B, and was used to spell the word KB, meaning cool. This layered phonetic system provided the flexibility to write any word in the language, from the name of a god to an abstract verb. Now, here's where it gets really clever, and where the potential for confusion arises. A single inscription often mixes logograms and phonograms. You might see the sun circle used as a logogram for the word Ra, and then immediately afterward, see it used again as a phonogram to spell the Ra sound in the name of a pharaoh like Ramesses. How did an ancient reader, or how do we, know the difference? This is the role of the third and final type of sign, the determinative. Determinatives are the unsung heroes of hieroglyphic writing. They are symbols placed at the end of a word that have no phonetic value. They are not pronounced. Instead, they act as semantic classifiers, telling you the general category or meaning of the word that came before it. They are the context clues that resolve ambiguity. Let's take a practical example. The word for swallow, as in the bird, might be spelled out phonetically. To ensure you don't read it as the verb to swallow, a scribe would place the determinative for a bird, a small drawing of a sparrow, at the end of the word. Conversely, the verb to swallow would end with the determinative of a man with his hand to his mouth, indicating an action related to eating or drinking. There are determinatives for concepts like gods, people, places, abstract ideas, and movement. They are the punctuation marks of meaning. So to read a single Egyptian word, you often have to perform a multi-step analysis. You identify the phonetic signs and sound them out. You check if any of those signs could also be acting as a logogram for a word. And finally, you look to the determinative to confirm the word's overall meaning and grammatical category. It's a beautiful, interlocking puzzle where image, sound, and idea converge on the stone wall. This layered complexity is what made the script so powerful for the Egyptians and so utterly baffling to outsiders for nearly 2 millennia. Understanding this structure is the first major step toward truly seeing these inscriptions not as random art, but as a logical, decipherable language. With this intricate writing system in place, the next logical question is who are the people trusted with wielding this divine technology, and how do they actually put ink to page? The world of the scribe was one of immense prestige and responsibility in ancient Egypt, serving as the very backbone of the state's administration. Imagine a young boy born into a family of means, beginning his training not with games, but with a relentless focus on memorizing hundreds of signs and their myriad uses. Education was rigorous and often involved copying standard text onto inexpensive materials like flakes of limestone or broken pottery, items known as ostraca. These ancient scratch pads were the training grounds where clumsy hands gradually learned the precise strokes required for each symbol. Mastering the sacred hieroglyphs for temple walls was the ultimate goal, but a scribe's daily life was predominantly spent using a completely different, far more practical script. For the vast majority of administrative work recording tax receipts, drafting legal documents, writing letters, and keeping accounts, scribes relied on a cursive script called hieratic. Think of hieratic as the everyday handwriting of ancient Egypt. It is a simplified, flowing, and connected version of hieroglyphs, specifically designed for speed and efficiency with a reed brush and ink on papyrus. While monumental hieroglyphs were carefully chiseled into stone to last for eternity, hieratic was written quickly to manage the affairs of the living. Over centuries, the two scripts evolved on parallel but distinct paths. A hieratic sign often looks nothing like its hieroglyphic counterpart to the untrained eye, having been reduced to a series of swift, efficient pen strokes. This is a critical point for any modern decoding attempt. Many of the surviving texts we have, from literary stories to business contracts, are written in hieratic on papyrus scrolls. To truly access the daily life of ancient Egypt, one must appreciate this more common script. The primary writing surface for these important documents was papyrus, a precursor to paper made from the pith of the papyrus plant woven together and pressed into sheet. This was a valuable commodity, which is why students practiced on ostraca and why we find so many surviving examples of these pottery shards covered in scribbles, sketches, and exercises. The scribe's toolkit was elegant in its simplicity: a wooden palette with 2 wells for red and black ink, a set of reed brushes, and a small water pot for wetting the ink. Black ink was standard, made from soot or charcoal, while red ink, often derived from ochre, was reserved for emphasis, such as highlighting a new paragraph, marking quantities, or writing words with negative connotation. The scribe himself was a respected figure, often depicted in tomb art sitting cross-legged with his papyrus scroll stretched over his kilt, a living conduit of the words of the god. Understanding this context, the materials, the scripts, and the scribe's revered role is not just background detail, it's fundamental to the decoding process. It explains why some texts look the way they do and reminds us that we are reading the work of human hands, individuals who made choices, sometimes even mistakes, as they transferred thought into written word. Yet for all its sophistication and power, this entire system of writing, this words of the god, did not last forever. Its decline was not a sudden collapse but a gradual fading, a slow forgetting that spanned centuries. The world that gave birth to hieroglyphs changed irrevocably, and as new powers and new beliefs swept across Egypt, the ancient script slowly retreated into silence. The pivotal moment in this story begins with the arrival of Alexander the Great in 332 BCE, which marked the start of the Ptolemaic period. Greek became the language of the state, of administration and commerce, while hieroglyphs continued to be used on temples and by a shrinking class of native Egyptian priests. Their everyday utility was diminishing. The practical script of hieratic began to be replaced by demotic, an even more simplified and cursive form, and then increasingly by Greek. The real turning point, however, came with the rise of Christianity and its adoption as the official religion of the Roman Empire. The new faith viewed the old Egyptian temples and their practices not as a cultural heritage to be preserved, but as pagan idolatry to be purged. In 392 CE, the Christian Emperor Theodosius issued a series of decrees ordering the closure of all pagan temples across the empire. This was a death blow to the institutional knowledge of hieroglyphs. For over 3,000 years, the temple priests had been the guardians of this sacred script, the small, elite class who understood its complexities and passed that knowledge down from master to apprentice in an unbroken chain. When the temples were shut down, that chain was shattered. The priests were dispersed, the schools of scribal training vanished, and the living tradition of reading and writing hieroglyphs effectively came to an end. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved on the gate of a temple at Philae in 494 CE, a final, lonely message sent into a future that could no longer understand it. What followed was a period of profound mystery. For over 1,000 years, the meaning of these elegant, enigmatic symbols was completely lost to the world. The stones themselves did not vanish. Great obelisks were still standing. Temple walls covered in intricate carvings were still visible, but they might as well have been messages from another planet. Europeans who encountered these artifacts in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance were utterly baffled. Without any key to their meaning, they fell back on wild speculation and fantastical theories. Some scholars, looking at the beautiful and stylized pictures, believed hieroglyphs were not a phonetic language at all, but a perfect divine form of communication, where each symbol contained a whole philosophical idea or a secret allegory. This mystical interpretation was famously promoted by a 15th century scholar named Horapollo, whose book Hieroglyphica was filled with elaborate but entirely incorrect explanations. He proposed that a hieroglyph of a hare meant to open because hares are born with their eyes open, or that a drawing of a goose signified a son because of the bird's supposed intense loyalty to its goslings. While completely wrong, his ideas held sway for centuries. This great forgetting created a vacuum that was filled with some of history's most creative and bizarre guesses. Alchemists scrutinized the symbols, convinced they held the secret formulas for transmuting base metals into gold. Early astronomers thought they were coded records of celestial movements. Some even believed they were not man-made at all, but a natural art form created by the wind and sand, or that they were the original language of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, a perfect tongue understood before the fall of the Tower of Babel. The true nature of the script, as a blend of sound signs and meaning signs, was so thoroughly obscured that it seemed everyone who looked at them saw only what they wanted to see. The stones were silent, and in that silence, the human imagination ran free, projecting its own desires, fears, and philosophies onto the inscrutable faces of the ancient carvings. This long period of misunderstanding makes the eventual decipherment not just an intellectual triumph, but a dramatic recovery of a world that had been thought lost forever. For over 1,000 years, the true meaning of the hieroglyphs remained shrouded in this fog of mystical speculation, a puzzle that seemed to defy any rational solution. The first significant, though ultimately misguided, attempt to cut through that fog came not from an explorer or a linguist, but from a 17th century German Jesuit scholar and polymath named Athanasius Kircher. Fluent in numerous languages and possessing a mind that buzzed with encyclopedic curiosity, Kircher was convinced that ancient Egypt held the keys to all primordial knowledge, and he believed hieroglyphs were the ultimate expression of that wisdom. His approach, however brilliant in its ambition, was fundamentally rooted in the same symbolic tradition that had hampered understanding for centuries. He dismissed the idea that these intricate carvings could represent anything as mundane as sounds or spoken language. To Kircher, each hieroglyph was a complex allegory, a dense packet of philosophical and theological ideas waiting to be unpacked by a scholar with the right key. His most famous work, and his most spectacular misstep, was his translation of the cartouche found on an obelisk in Rome. We now know this cartouche contains the name of the pharaoh Apries. Kircher, applying a symbolic framework, interpreted it as a profound spiritual message. He read the signs not phonetically, but as a sequence of abstract concepts, translating the entire group as The beneficent activity of the Osiris is procured by sacred ceremonies and by the chain of the genii, in order that the enjoyment of his benefits may be conveyed to the Typhonian domain. It was a translation that said far more about Kircher's own Baroque-era Christian worldview and his fascination with esoteric wisdom than it did about ancient Egypt. It was beautifully elaborate, deeply learned, and completely, utterly wrong. Yet, to dismiss Kircher entirely would be a grave mistake, for within his spectacular failures lay the seeds of future success. Kircher's greatest contribution was not his translations, but his meticulous and systematic publication of the glyphs themselves. He was one of the first to seriously propose that the Coptic language, still used in the liturgy of the Egyptian Christian Church, was a direct descendant of the ancient Egyptian tongue. This was a stroke of genius and a critical leap in logic that would later prove essential. He passionately argued that understanding Coptic was the only possible bridge to the past, a hypothesis that the eventual decipherer, Champollion, would take to heart. Furthermore, by publishing detailed engravings of the inscriptions he studied, Kircher made these enigmatic symbols available to a wider audience of scholars for the first time. He was cataloging the problem, even if he was solving it incorrectly. He demonstrated that hieroglyphs deserved serious, scholarly attention and could not be explained away by fanciful myths about wind or alchemy. His work, in a strange way, set the stage for the more methodical, linguistic approaches that would follow by establishing that this was a field worthy of academic rigor. The lesson from Kircher and other early interpreters is a crucial one in the history of code breaking. Sometimes you have to be wrong in a big, bold, and detailed way to show others the path to being right. Their insistence on pure symbolism created a powerful negative example. It established a hypothesis that future scholars could then test and ultimately disprove. They showed what hieroglyphs were not, which is often the first and most necessary step in discovering what they are. The stage was now set for a new kind of thinker, one less concerned with mystical secrets and more focused on the gritty details of grammar and sound, to finally approach the ancient script with a fresh set of eyes. The turning point would require not just a brilliant mind, but a physical key, a real-world artifact that would provide the undeniable clues needed to shatter the symbolic myth once and for all. The long-awaited key to breaking this centuries-old deadlock was not discovered in a quiet library or a dusty archive, but quite literally in the dirt, unearthed by soldiers in the heat of a military campaign. The year was 1799, and Napoleon Bonaparte's ambitious expedition to Egypt was in full swing. While the French military campaign had its own strategic goals, Napoleon had astutely brought with him a corps of 167 scholars, scientists, and artists, a veritable brain trust known as the Commission des Sciences et Arts d'Egypte. Their mission was to systematically document every aspect of the ancient and modern country, from its flora and fauna to its monumental ruins. This fusion of military might and scholarly pursuit set the stage for one of the most consequential accidental discoveries in archaeological history. The scene was a small, crumbling fort known as Fort Julien, near the town of Rosetta, or Rashid, in the Nile Delta. French soldiers under the command of Lieutenant Pierre-François Bouchard were engaged in the mundane but necessary work of strengthening the fort's defenses, which involved tearing down old walls to repurpose the stone. On July 15th, a group of men digging in the foundations stumbled upon a large, dark slab of granite, a stone similar to granite. It was roughly 3 feet 9 inches long, 2 feet 4 inches wide, and 11 inches thick, and it was immediately clear that this was no ordinary building block. One face was polished smooth and covered in 3 distinct bands of meticulously carved writing. Bouchard, to his immense credit, was not just a soldier, he was an engineer with an educated eye. He immediately recognized the potential significance of the stone and halted the demolition work, sending word up the chain of command to the scholars in Napoleon's Institute. The stone was quickly transported to the Institute's headquarters in Cairo, where the scholars could hardly contain their excitement. They gathered around it, their initial assessments confirming Bouchard's hunch. The slab was a fragment of a much larger stela, a type of public decree stone. Most incredibly, it bore the same message repeated in 3 different scripts. At the top were 14 lines of the elegant, formal script that had baffled Europe for so long, classic Egyptian hieroglyphs. The middle section contained 32 lines of a flowing, cursive script that the scholars identified as Demotic, the common script of everyday life in later periods of ancient Egypt. And the foundation, the part that sent a jolt of electricity through the room, was 54 lines of perfectly clear, comprehensible ancient Greek. The Greek text was the Rosetta Stone's gift to the world. The scholars, many of whom were classically trained, could read it without much difficulty. It was a decree issued in 196 BCE by a council of priests celebrating the first anniversary of the coronation of the young pharaoh Ptolemy V Epiphane. It listed the honors bestowed upon the king for his generosity to the temples and priesthoods, and commanded that this decree be inscribed on stelae in the 3 sacred languages and placed in every major temple across Egypt. In that moment, the scholars knew they were holding the equivalent of a cryptographic one-time pad. They had the ciphertext, the mysterious hieroglyphic and demotic scripts, and they had the plain text, the known Greek translation. The 3,000-year silence was finally broken, not by a theory, but by a tangible, physical key. News of the discovery spread like wildfire through intellectual circles in Europe. The stone itself, however, would soon become a prize of war. When the French forces were defeated by the British in 1801, the terms of their surrender included the handing over of all antiquities collected by the French, the Rosetta Stone chief among them. It was shipped to England and presented to King George III, who subsequently donated it to the British Museum, where it has resided ever since. Almost immediately, plaster casts and printed copies of the inscriptions were made and distributed to scholars and academies across Europe. The race to decipher hieroglyphs was now officially on, and the ultimate intellectual challenge began not with a whisper, but with the explosive force of a solved mystery waiting to happen. The stone provided the crucial parallels, but it was far from a simple translation exercise. The real work of matching sign to sound, of cracking the code's underlying logic, would require a level of genius and dedication that few could muster. With the Rosetta Stone's inscriptions now available across Europe, the stage was set for an intellectual duel unlike any other, a fierce race between 2 brilliant but profoundly different minds. On one side was Thomas Young, a British polymath and physicist hailed as the last man who knew everything. Young was a master of optics, medicine, and languages, a man whose curiosity ranged across all fields of human knowledge. His approach to the Rosetta Stone was that of a scientific problem solver. He started with the Greek text, which he could read, and began the painstaking work of looking for corresponding patterns in the unknown script. His first major insight was a simple but powerful one. He noticed that certain groups of characters in the demotic text appeared repeatedly and seemed to be encircled or set apart, much like how the names of royalty were often highlighted in the Greek. He correctly guessed that these were the names of the ruling Ptolemy family. Applying this same logic to the hieroglyphic section, he observed a group of signs enclosed in a distinct oval loop, a cartouche, which we now know was reserved for royal names. Focusing on the name Ptolemaios from the Greek text, he began to match the hieroglyphic signs to the sounds of the name. He identified that the first sign, a square, might represent a P, and a lion might be an L. While his final phonetic values were not entirely accurate, his conclusion was earth-shattering. He had proven that at least some hieroglyphs were not purely symbolic, but were used phonetically to spell out foreign names. This was the first major crack in the symbolic theory that had dominated for over 1,000 years. Young published his findings, but being a man of many pursuits, he soon moved on to other scientific challenges, viewing the decipherment as an intriguing puzzle he had partly solved rather than a lifelong obsession. Across the English Channel, a very different kind of scholar was working with a burning, singular passion. Jean-Francois Champollion was not a polymath. He was a philologist utterly consumed by a single dream to hear the voice of ancient Egypt. From a young age, he was a linguistic prodigy, mastering Latin, Greek, Hebrew, Arabic, Syriac, and most crucially, Coptic. He was fervently convinced, just as Athanasius Kircher had been centuries before, that Coptic was the direct descendant of the ancient Egyptian language. He would often think to himself and even lecture his students in Coptic, believing it was the key that would eventually unlock the past. For Champollion, this was not a side project, it was his life's mission. When he received a copy of the Rosetta Stone inscriptions, he threw himself into the work with an intensity that bordered on mania. He started where Young had left off, confirming the younger scholar's work on the Ptolemy cartouche. But Champollion knew that proving hieroglyphs could write foreign names was only half the battle. The true test would be to find an indigenous Egyptian name, a name from deep within Egypt's own history, spelled out phonetically. His moment of revelation came when he received copies of inscriptions from another temple, this one featuring a cartouche that clearly contained a different royal name. Using the phonetic values he had been developing, he sounded out the signs. The first was a circle, which he knew could represent the sun and the sound Ra. The next was a shape that looked like a folded cloth, which he tentatively assigned the sound MS. The final sign was a sickle-like form, which he believed stood for S. Putting it together, he read the name aloud, Ra-Meses. It was the name of the greatest pharaoh of them all, Rameses. He had done it. He had read a purely Egyptian name, not a Greek one, using phonetic principles. In a fever of excitement, he immediately found another cartouche, this one containing only the first two signs, the sun and the folded cloth, Ra-Mes. It could only be the name of another great king, Thutmose. This was the confirmation he needed. He rushed into his brother's office, shouted, "G-Tines Elifair, I've got it," and then collapsed into a dead faint, utterly exhausted by the years of work and the sheer emotional force of the breakthrough. Champollion's genius was not just in his linguistic skill, but in his profound understanding that hieroglyphs were a mixed system. He realized that they use phonetic signs for many words, especially foreign names and verbs, while still employing logograms and determinatives for clarity. He had not just found a key for names, he had discovered the underlying grammar and structure of the entire language, finally hearing the true voice of the ancients after centuries of silence. Champollion's breakthrough began not with a grand theory, but with a simple, focused strategy: follow the names. He understood that royal cartouches, those distinctive oval loops enclosing hieroglyphs, were the perfect starting point for a decipher. These enclosed groups were clearly set apart from the rest of the text, signaling something special. Thanks to the Greek text on the Rosetta Stone, he knew one of these cartouches had to represent the name Ptolemy. He also had access to a second crucial cartouche, this one from an obelisk found at Philae, which the English Egyptologist William John Banks had identified as belonging to Cleopatra. Here was a magnificent opportunity: two royal names, both foreign and Greek in origin, with several matching sounds. If hieroglyphs could represent these sounds, the signs should correspond. He laid the two cartouches side by side and began the meticulous work of comparison. The Cleopatra cartouche provided a vital clue because it was spelled out more fully. Champollion started with the obvious. The second sign in Cleopatra was a lion. The fourth sign in Ptolemy was also a lion. In the name Cleopatra, the lion falls where the L sound should be. In Ptolemy, the lion appears where the L sound should be. This was a powerful indication that the lion hieroglyph represented the sound L. He noticed a similar pattern with the fourth sign in Cleopatra, which looked like an open mouth. In Ptolemy, the fifth sign was that same open mouth. In Cleopatra, the mouth was in the position for the P sound, and in Ptolemy, it was in the position for the P sound. Another correspondence: the final sign in Cleopatra was a bent arm, which he tentatively assigned to the T sound. He then looked at the beginning of the Ptolemy cartouche and saw a square, which he hypothesized was a P, and at the end, a loaf of bread-like sign for the S sound. He was slowly building a grid of phonetic values, sign by sign. This comparative method was brilliant, but it was only the first step. It demonstrated that hieroglyphs could be used phonetically for foreign names, confirming and expanding on Thomas Young's earlier work. But Champollion's true genius lay in pushing this principle further than anyone had dared. He asked a revolutionary question: if hieroglyphs could spell out Greek names phonetically, why not native Egyptian names as well? This was the leap that would ultimately shatter the centuries-old belief that hieroglyphs were purely symbolic. The moment of ultimate validation arrived when he studied copies of inscriptions from temples like Abu Simbel. He encountered a cartouche that was clearly different from the Greek ones he had been studying. Applying his growing understanding of phonetic values, he began to sound it out. The first sign was a circle, the sun disk, which he knew from Coptic was associated with the word Ra, the sun god. The next sign was what appeared to be a folded cloth, which he theorized could represent the sound mes or ms. The final sign was a sickle-like glyph, which he believed stood for S. He put it together, Ra-Mes-S. It was the name of one of Egypt's most legendary pharaohs, Ramesses. The meaning, he would later understand, was Ra has given birth to him. Overwhelmed with excitement, he immediately searched for and found another cartouche containing just the first two signs, the sun and the folded cloth. Ra-Mes, this could only be the name of another great ruler, Thutmose, meaning Thoth is born. This was the incontrovertible proof. He wasn't just reading foreign words, he was reading the names of Egypt's own native kings, spelled out using a consistent phonetic system. The impact of this realization was so physically and emotionally overwhelming that he reportedly rushed into his brother's office, exclaimed G-Tines el affair. "I've got it," and then collapsed, unconscious for several days. He had not merely decoded a word, he had unlocked the fundamental principle that hieroglyphs were a complex Chinese letter system, using phonetic signs to spell words while still employing logograms and determinatives for meaning and clarity. The voices of the pharaohs, silent for over a millennium, could finally be heard again, armed with the monumental realization that hieroglyphs could spell the names of native pharaohs. Champollion's work exploded in scope and ambition. Cracking the cartouches was the crucial first door, but it only opened into a vast, uncharted hallway of language. The next, even more daunting task was to move beyond the names of kings and into the common words of the people, to reconstruct the very sounds of everyday life in ancient Egypt. This required a shift in strategy from identifying isolated signs to building a systematic, functional alphabet. Champollion, along with other scholars who were now joining the race, understood that the royal names provided a limited but powerful set of phonetic clues. Each cartouche was like a small, self-contained spelling lesson. The name Ptolemy gave them signs for P, T, O, L, M, and a vowel like Y sound. Cleopatra contributed signs for C or K, L, E, O, P, A, T, and R. By cross-referencing these names and others, they could start to assemble a grid of consonant values, slowly piecing together the hieroglyphic equivalent of an ABC's chart. This process was far from straightforward. The Egyptian writing system was not a simple, one-to-one alphabet like our own. They had uniliteral signs, which represented a single consonant, but they also had a wealth of biliteral signs representing two consonants and triliteral signs for three. Furthermore, the vowel sounds were almost never written, meaning that the same group of consonants could be vocalized in different ways. The sign they now knew as representing the sound ms could be part of the name Thutmose or Ramesses, but on its own, it could be the word for to give birth. The challenge was to take the phonetic values confirmed by the Greek names and test them against purely Egyptian words, using Coptic as their essential guide and dictionary. Champollion's deep fluency in Coptic became his greatest asset here. He would look at a group of hieroglyphs, assign them their tentative sound values based on his growing alphabet, and then see if the resulting string of consonants matched a word he knew from Coptic. It was an endless process of hypothesis and verification. For example, consider the simple hieroglyph of an owl. From the royal names, this sign had been identified as representing the consonant M. But Champollion saw this owl appear in countless non-royal inscriptions. When he sounded it out as just M, it didn't correspond to any meaningful word. But when he looked at the context, he often saw it followed by a reed leaf, a sign he had determined could be a simple vowel indicator or the consonant I. The combination, M and I, triggered a connection to the Coptic word mai, which means to come. This was an electrifying moment. He wasn't just reading a name, he was reading a verb, an action. Another breakthrough came with the hieroglyph for a water ripple, which was used for the consonant N. He saw this sign in a word preceding the determinative for a god, and the consonant spelled out NTR. He knew from Coptic that Naut meant God. He was now reading the very language of religion and divinity. This meticulous, word-by-word reconstruction allowed Champollion and his contemporaries to gradually expand their phonetic alphabet from a handful of signs to dozens. They began to see patterns and families of signs. They realized that the Egyptians often used both a biliteral sign and then repeated its second consonant with a uniliteral sign, a practice Egyptologists now call phonetic complementation. For instance, the biliteral sign R and A might be written, and then followed by the uniliteral sign for A again, as if to make sure the reader pronounced the final sound correctly. This wasn't redundancy, it was a built-in pronunciation guide. With each new word deciphered, their confidence grew. They moved from reading the grandiose titles of Pharaoh, son of Ra, Lord of the Two Lands, to understanding more humble, yet profoundly human, inscription. They could read the name of a scribe who had carved his own name into a tomb wall, the offering formula that ensured bread and beer for the deceased in the afterlife, and the prayers to gods like Osiris and Anubis. The final, irrefutable validation of this phonetic alphabet came when Champollion applied it to a completely new set of texts that had not been available to him during his initial research. In 1822, just a year after his initial breakthrough, he was given access to copies of inscriptions from the great Temple of Abu Simbel, built by Ramesses Roman II. Using the system he had painstakingly built in his Paris study, far from the sands of Egypt, he was able to read the name of Ramesses and the name of another great pharaoh from an entirely different dynasty, Thutmose. He could identify the names of gods and common nouns. His system worked. It was consistent, logical, and applicable across centuries of Egyptian history. This was the ultimate proof that he had not stumbled upon a quirky exception used only for foreign rulers. He had discovered the underlying mechanism of the entire language. The alphabet he built was the master key that finally threw open the doors to 3,000 years of history, literature, and daily life, allowing the world to hear the whispers of the Nile not just from its kings, but from all its people. While the Rosetta Stone was the undeniable key that unlocked the door, it was far from the only source of light in the room. Think of it as the first and most important piece of a massive, continent-spanning jigsaw puzzle. But to see the full picture, to verify that the emerging translations were accurate and not just a lucky guess with one specific text, scholars needed more pieces. They needed additional inscriptions that provided the same crucial parallel between a known language and the unknown scripts of ancient Egypt. This is where other bilingual and even trilingual texts became absolutely indispensable, acting as vital cross-references that confirmed Champollion's theories and filled in the countless gaps in the nascent hieroglyphic dictionary. One of the most significant of these secondary keys was the Decree of Canopus. Discovered in 1866 at Tanis, this stela predates the Rosetta Stone by about 60 years, issued in 239 BCE during the reign of Ptolemy III Euergetes. Its structure is strikingly similar to the Rosetta Stone. It presents the same decree in three scripts: hieroglyphs, Demotic, and Greek. For the scholars racing to decipher the scripts, the Canopus decree was a gift of monumental importance. It provided a brand new set of phrases, names, and grammatical constructions to compare. Where the Rosetta Stone might have had a damaged or unclear section in one script, the Canopus decree might present that same phrase perfectly preserved. It was like being given a second copy of the answer key to an exam, allowing them to double-check their work and correct minor errors. The decree's longer and more complex Greek text also offered a richer vocabulary, helping translators move beyond royal names and into the more nuanced language of priestly decrees and religious offerings, further solidifying the phonetic values of many common hieroglyphs. Another critical piece of evidence came from an entirely different source, the Philae obelisk. This is not a massive stela, but a pair of obelisks discovered by the explorer William John Banks on the island of Philae in 1815. One of these obelisks bore a short Greek inscription on its base, which mentioned a King Ptolemy and a Queen Cleopatra. More importantly, the hieroglyphic inscriptions on the obelisk itself featured two clear cartouches. Banks, a keen classicist, surmised that these oval rings must contain the names mentioned in the Greek text. He had the brilliant insight to publish detailed drawings of the obelisk and its inscriptions, making them available to scholars across Europe. This obelisk became a critical test case. Champollion and Thomas Young before him used these two cartouches to perform the side-by-side comparison that proved the phonetic principle for the letters P, T, O, L, and most importantly, the feminine ending T and A in the name Cleopatra. The Philae obelisk was a smaller, more focused puzzle, but it provided the clean, undeniable parallels for specific sounds that helped cement the initial breakthroughs. The cumulative effect of these additional texts cannot be overstated. Each new bilingual inscription acted as a separate control experiment, verifying that the rules deciphered from the Rosetta Stone were not unique to that single context, but were consistent across different time periods, locations, and types of documents. They allowed scholars to identify variations in spelling and style, to understand how the script evolved over time, and to gradually build a comprehensive sign list. It was a process of moving from a handful of confirmed phonetic signs to a full-blown understanding of the language's grammar and syntax. Without these cross-references, the decipherment might have remained a brilliant but unproven hypothesis, confined to the names of a few Greek pharaohs. Instead, they provided the redundant proof needed to transform a fledgling theory into an established science, giving the world the tools to finally listen to the stories the stones had been waiting to tell for 10 years. With the phonetic alphabet finally in hand, scholars could sound out individual words, but this was like having a dictionary without any instructions on how to form a sentence. They could pronounce Ra and MS and S, but to truly understand the name Ramesses, as Ra has given birth to him, they needed to crack the code of Egyptian grammar. This was the next monumental hurdle, moving from a list of vocabulary words to comprehending the flow of ideas, the relationships between subjects and actions, and the subtle nuances that turn sounds into meaning. The structure of the Egyptian language was profoundly different from Greek or Latin, and without a grasp of its rules, translations would remain clumsy and literal, missing the elegance and intent of the original text. The foundational key, once again, was the Coptic language. Champollion and others understood that Coptic was not just a repository of vocabulary, it was a living fossil preserving the grammatical skeleton of ancient Egyptian. By analyzing Coptic texts, they could identify patterns of verb conjugation, pronoun usage, and sentence construction. They began to see that ancient Egyptian, like Coptic, was an Afro-Asiatic language, sharing structural features with languages like Hebrew and Arabic. This meant its grammar operated on principles that were entirely foreign to most European scholars, built around a root system of consonants where vowels changed to alter meaning and function. A root like SDM, to hear, could generate words for hearing, heard, listener, and ear by inserting different vowels and adding prefixes and suffixes, a system where the skeleton of the word remained constant, but its flesh and blood changed its role in the sentence. Figuring out verb forms was particularly challenging. Unlike European languages with their complex tenses, ancient Egyptian verbs expressed time and aspect in a different way. They primarily conveyed whether an action was completed or ongoing, rather than pinning it to a specific past, present, or future moment. Scholars deciphered the basic verb form known as the infinitive, which was the dictionary entry for an action, like to go. Then, they identified the suffix pronoun that could be attached to make it his going or her going. They also uncovered the existence of participles, verb forms that function like adjectives, such as the going one meaning the goer or the one who goes. Understanding these distinctions was crucial. In a funerary inscription, the difference between his giving and he gives could change the entire meaning of an offering formula, determining whether the deceased was the recipient of the gift or the one eternally performing the act of giving. Nouns also had their own complexities. While they didn't have a formal case system like Latin, they had gender masculine and feminine and number singular, plural, and even a dual for pairs of things. The feminine ending was often a simple T sound, a pattern easily recognizable from Coptic, so the word for a brother was SN, while sister was SNT. The hieroglyphic script provided helpful clues for readers. Determinatives, those silent semantic classifiers, acted as incredible grammatical signposts. A word followed by the determinative of a seated man or woman often indicated it was a person or a title, A word ending with the papyrus scroll determinative frequently signaled an abstract concept. These symbols didn't just clarify meaning, they helped the reader parse the sentence, identifying the subject, the object, and the action by their visual category. Perhaps the most significant grammatical breakthrough was deciphering the standard word order. In an English sentence, we follow a subject-verb-object structure. The priest-subject offers verb-bread-object. Ancient Egyptian, however, typically used a verb-subject-object order, so the same sentence would be structured as offers verb the priest-subject bread-object. This was a complete reversal of what European scholars were accustomed to, and it initially led to many confused and inverted translations. Recognizing this pattern was like finally being given the correct lens through which to view the entire language. Sentences that had seemed like jumbled collections of words suddenly snapped into a logical and consistent order. Furthermore, they discovered that adjectives followed the nouns they modified, and prepositions came before their objects, creating a flowing, predictable rhythm within the hieroglyphic lines. This grammatical decipherment transformed the script from a static museum display into a dynamic conversation. Scholars were no longer just listing the names of gods and kings. They were understanding the prayers those kings offered, the laws they decreed, and the stories they told. They could differentiate between a command, "Give me bread," and a statement of fact, "He gives me bread." They could appreciate the poetic parallelism in hymns and the precise, formulaic language of legal contract. The ability to parse a full sentence with its subject, verb, and object all in their proper Egyptian order was the final turn of the key. It didn't just allow them to read the words on the wall, it allowed them to hear the voice of the scribe, to understand the thought behind the text, and to finally, truly listen to what ancient Egypt had been trying to say for millennia. Now, with the core phonetic system and grammar largely understood, decipherers faced what might be the most uniquely Egyptian layer of the entire writing system, the silent world of determinatives. These enigmatic symbols are perhaps the clearest demonstration of the hieroglyphic script's genius and its greatest challenge for a modern reader. Imagine you've successfully sounded out a word. You have its pronunciation, but its meaning remains frustratingly ambiguous. This is precisely the problem determinatives were designed to solve. They are the semantic traffic cops of the script, guiding the reader to the correct lane of meaning without making a sound. A determinative is a hieroglyph placed at the end of a word that carries no phonetic value whatsoever. You do not pronounce it. Instead, its sole job is to categorize the word that precedes it, providing crucial context that the sounds alone cannot convey. Think of it like the emojis we use in modern digital communication. If you text someone the word bank, its meaning is unclear. Did you mean a financial institution or the side of a river? But if you follow it with a money bag emoji or a wave emoji, the ambiguity vanishes instantly. Determinatives work on this exact same principle, but with a formalized, intricate system developed thousands of years ago. The ancient Egyptian scribes employed a vast library of these classifying signs. There was a determinative for gods, a seated figure with a divine beard. For people and professions, they used the silhouette of a seated man or woman. A word related to a city or foreign land would end with a circle containing an intersection, representing a planned settlement. Abstract concepts, emotions, and verbs often concluded with a rolled-up papyrus scroll, signifying something written or intellectual. If a word involved movement or travel, you might find the determinative of two legs walking. There was even a determinative for anything unpleasant or bad, often depicted as a crocodile skin or a knife cutting into a piece of flesh. This system provided an elegant visual grammar that worked in tandem with the phonetic spelling. For the modern decoder, determinatives are a double-edged sword. On one hand, they are an incredible helper. When you encounter a new or unfamiliar word, the determinative can be your best friend, immediately narrowing down the field of possible meanings. If you sound out the consonants N and R and see the divine determinative at the end, you can be almost certain the word is Netcher, meaning God. It confirms your guess and prevents a misreading. In this sense, determinatives act as built-in error correction, a fail-safe that ensures the reader is on the right track. On the other hand, they present a significant hurdle, especially for beginners. The primary challenge is that there is no single, definitive determinative for each category. The choice of which sign to use could depend on a scribe's personal style, the time period, or even the specific nuance he wanted to convey. A word for scribe might take the general determinative for a man, or it might use the more specific determinative of a scribble palette and pouch to emphasize the profession. This variability means a decoder must familiarize themselves with dozens of common determinatives and their possible alternates. Furthermore, because they are silent, it's easy for an inexperienced eye to mistakenly try to assign a sound value to them, leading to a completely botched translation. The very feature that provides clarity for a native reader can create confusion for a modern learner who hasn't yet internalized this vast visual dictionary. Mastering determinatives is what separates a basic decoding attempt from true, fluent reading of hieroglyphs. It requires a shift from a purely auditory mindset to a visual and contextual one. You are no longer just listening for the sounds, you are learning to see the meaning. You begin to scan the end of a word almost instinctively, letting the determinative guide your interpretation before you even consult a dictionary. This holistic approach, combining phonetics, grammar, and semantic classifiers, finally allows you to read with the fluency and comprehension that the ancient scribes intended, fully appreciating the elegant efficiency of their divine word. Now that we have the tools, let's step out of the textbook and into the tomb itself. Picture a chamber deep within the rock, its walls covered from floor to ceiling with intricate carvings and painted hieroglyphs, all shimmering in the flickering light of a torch. This isn't a random collection of art. It's a carefully composed narrative designed to serve the deceased for eternity. To read it, we must first learn to navigate it. The first rule of engagement is perhaps the most counterintuitive for a modern reader: direction. Hieroglyphs do not always read left to right. In fact, they are wonderfully flexible. The key is to look at the living world within the inscription itself. Look at any block of text and find the animal hieroglyphs: the birds, the snakes, the rabbits. Which way are they facing? You always read into their faces. If the birds are looking to the right, you start on the right and read left. If they're facing left, you start on the left and read right. The text is organized in vertical columns or horizontal lines, but this simple trick of observing the orientation of the figures is your compass for every single inscription you will ever encounter. With our direction established, our eyes instinctively scan for the most prominent feature, the cartouche. That elegant oval loop is a beacon in the text, signaling the name of a king or queen. In a tomb, this is almost always the name of the pharaoh whom the tomb owner served, a way of showing loyalty and securing a place in the royal court for eternity. But let's say we find a second cartouche. This one is different. The first might be a well-known royal name, but the second could be the name of the tomb's owner themselves. A high official granted the rare honor of encircling their own name, elevating them to a near-royal status in death. Identifying these cartouches gives us our anchor points, the key characters in the story written on the wall. We can sound them out using the phonetic alphabet, immediately giving us the who of this eternal narrative. But the real magic, and the true test of our decoding skills, begins with the text that surround these royal names. This is where we move from reading sounds to reading meaning, and our greatest allies are the silent determinatives. Let's take a common funerary scene showing the deceased sitting before an offering table piled high with bread, meat, and vegetables. The hieroglyphic text above it is likely an offering formula. We might sound out the first word, HTP, that's the consonants. On its own, it can mean several things, but then we look to the end of the word group. What is the determinative? We see the loaf of bread hieroglyph. This is the determinative for food and offerings. Suddenly, HTP resolves into hedep, meaning an offering. The next word might be di, which we know means to give. But who is giving? We look for a pronoun or a name, and to whom is it given? We might then see the name of a god, like Osiris, followed by the divine determinative, the seated god with a beard. Then we see the name of the deceased, followed by the determinative for a man. Piecing it all together, we can now read the full sentence: an offering which the king gives an Osiris, so that they may give an invocation offering of bread and beer to the ka of the revered name of the deceased. This wasn't just a nice sentiment, it was a functional, magical spell. The Egyptians believed that by inscribing these words and showing these images, they were ensuring the actual, eternal provision of food and drink for the soul of the person buried there. Every time a living person spoke the words aloud, the magic was reactivated. So when we read these inscriptions today, we are not just translating words, we are participating in an ancient ritual, giving voice to a prayer that was meant to last forever. The determinatives guided the ancient priest in his recitation, and now, thousands of years later, they guide us in our understanding, allowing us to complete the circuit and fulfill the final wish of the person who lies within. Moving from the personal prayers of the tomb to the monumental declarations of the temple is like stepping from a private chapel into the grandest cathedral imaginable. The scale is overwhelming, and the language shifts from a direct petition to the gods into a complex, multi-layered symphony of divine praise. Temples like Karnak were not merely houses of worship. They were believed to be the literal dwelling places of the gods on earth, the focal point of the entire cosmos. Every column, every wall, every inch of surface was inscribed with hieroglyphs that were far more than simple descriptions. They were active participants in maintaining the universe, and decoding them requires us to think like a priest, an astronomer, and a mythologist all at once. The first thing that strikes you at a place like Karnak is the sheer density of the writing. Unlike the clean lines of a tomb text, temple walls are often covered in deeply incised, intricate hieroglyphs that are packed together in a dazzling display of artistic and theological complexity. These inscriptions are not organized for easy reading by a casual observer. They are arranged to create symbolic patterns, to mirror celestial alignments, and to interact with the architecture itself. A single column might be completely wrapped in text from base to capital, each sign carved with a precision meant to last for eternity. The hieroglyphs themselves are often more elaborate and detailed than their funerary counterparts, sometimes carved in raised relief that catches the sunlight, making them appear to glow with divine energy. To interpret these texts, your standard phonetic decoding is just the starting point. You can sound out the name of the god Amun-Ra perfectly, but that alone tells you very little. The real meaning is buried in the layers of symbolism and mythological allusion. For instance, a common phrase in Theban temples is Amun-Ra, Lord of the Thrones of the Two Lands. Linguistically, it's straightforward, but theologically, it's incredibly dense. Lord of the Thrones doesn't just mean he is a king, it refers to his role as the ultimate source of all royal power, the force that legitimizes every pharaoh who ever ruled. The Two Lands is a constant reminder of his dominion over the unified Egypt, both the fertile black land of the Nile Valley and the red land of the desert. A simple title becomes a profound statement about cosmic order, known as Ma'at. This is where knowledge of mythology becomes non-negotiable. The walls of Karnak are an illustrated storybook of Egyptian cosmology. You will constantly encounter references to the creation myth, where the god Ptah spoke the world into existence, or where Amun emerged from the primordial waters of Nun. To understand a description of a pharaoh making an offering, you need to know that the act is symbolically replaying the myth of Horus presenting the eye to his father Osiris, a story of restoration and healing. The offerings themselves are symbolic. Incense isn't just a pleasant smell, it represents the sweat of the gods. Water libations symbolize the primordial flood from which life emerged. Without this mythological key, the text remains a beautiful but meaningless list of items. Furthermore, the Egyptians employed a sophisticated system of wordplay and homophones that infused their religious language with double meanings. The word for swallow, the bird, and to be were homophones, so a depiction of a swallow near the god Atum could be a clever reference to his existence as a creator deity. The word for field sounded like the word for to remember, creating a poetic link between agriculture and memory in funerary texts. Spotting these puns requires a deep familiarity with the sound of the language and the playful, intellectual mindset of the ancient scribes who wove these hidden connections into the very fabric of their sacred spaces. Decoding a temple wall, therefore, is the ultimate challenge. It demands not only that you read the words, but that you listen for their echoes in the vast chamber of Egyptian myth. understanding that every carved symbol was a deliberate stitch in the tapestry of the cosmos. While the towering temples and royal tombs offer a majestic view of pharaohs and gods, to truly walk the streets of ancient Egypt and hear the voices of its everyday people, we must turn our eyes from stone to paper, or more precisely, to papyrus. This is where the world of the scribe truly comes alive, not in the slow, deliberate chiseling of a monument for eternity, but in the swift, flowing strokes of a reed brush on a scroll meant for the here and now. The script used for these documents is called hieratic, a practical, cursive adaptation of the formal hieroglyphs we've been studying. Imagine the difference between carefully painting a formal sign with perfect block letters and quickly jotting down a grocery list in your own personal handwriting. That's the fundamental shift we're dealing with when we move from hieroglyphs to hieratic. Decoding these papyrus scrolls presents a unique and fascinating set of challenges that are entirely different from reading a tomb wall. The first hurdle is simply the script itself. Hieratic is not just simplified hieroglyphs, it's a radically transformed writing system optimized for speed. Over centuries, the detailed pictures of hieroglyphs were reduced to abstract, connected pen strokes. A beautifully drawn owl hieroglyph, representing the M sound, becomes in hieratic a quick, almost zigzag-like mark. A water ripple sign for N might be reduced to a simple, wavy line. To the untrained eye, a column of hieratic can look like an elegant but completely indecipherable calligraphic script. It requires learning a whole new visual alphabet, one where the connection between the original picture and the cursive sign is often obscured by centuries of stylistic evolution. Then there's the material itself. Papyrus, while durable enough to survive millennia in the dry Egyptian sand, is still fragile. Scrolls can be torn, faded, or riddled with holes. Unlike a carved stone inscription that stands clear and proud, a papyrus text might have ink that has bled, words that have been smudged by a wet sleeve 2,000 years ago, or entire sections that are simply missing. The decoder must often become a restorer, using context and knowledge of grammar to fill in the gaps where the papyrus has disintegrated. Furthermore, these are working documents. Scribes made errors. They might scratch out a word and write above it, or squeeze in a forgotten phrase in the margin. Reading hieratic is to see the human hand at work, complete with its moments of haste and fallibility, something you rarely get from the perfection of a royal monument. But the reward for overcoming these obstacles is unparalleled, a direct window into the daily rhythm of ancient Egyptian life. While hieroglyphs on temples shout about the glory of the gods and the power of the king, hieratic on papyrus whispers about the concerns of ordinary people. We have administrative records that are essentially ancient tax returns, meticulously listing how much grain came from which farmer. We have legal documents detailing marriage contracts, divorce settlements, and disputes over inheritance. There are letters between family members, filled with the same worries, gossip, and affection we share today. One famous letter from a son to his father complained that the other children in the family get nice clothes while he is left with rags, a timeless adolescent grievance etched onto papyrus. Perhaps some of the most moving documents are the personal letters found in workers' villages, like Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who built the royal tombs. These are not prayers for the afterlife, but requests for a spare loaf of bread, instructions to a wife on how to manage the household budget, or anxious notes wondering why a relative hasn't written back. In these texts, the determinatives change too. Instead of the grand determinative for a god, you see the simple sign for a man or a woman. Instead of a symbol for eternity, you might find the determinative for a piece of pottery or a sack of grain. The language itself becomes less formal, more direct, and brimming with the personality of the writer. Decoding hieratic is the ultimate act of historical empathy. It allows us to push past the gold and glory of the pharaohs and finally meet the people themselves, the scribe, the farmer, the soldier, the mother, and discover that their hopes, their struggles, and their voices are not so different from our own. Even with a firm grasp of phonetics and grammar, the ancient Egyptian scribes left behind a final, elegant layer of complexity that continues to challenge modern decoders. This is the world of homophones and polyvalent signs, a feature of the language that demonstrates its incredible sophistication but also creates a minefield of potential misinterpretation for anyone without a native speaker's intuition. At its heart, this system reveals a language that loved wordplay, where sound and meaning were intertwined in a delicate dance, and where context was not just helpful but absolutely paramount to understanding. Let's start with homophones, a concept we are familiar with in English. Think of words like night and night. They sound identical but have completely different meanings. Ancient Egyptian was filled with such pairs, but with a critical twist. Their writing system often omitted vowels. This means that many words that sounded distinct in speech became identical when written down using only their consonant skeleton. For instance, the consonant group MN could represent the word for morn or the word for fortress. When you see those two hieroglyphs carved on a wall, how you know which meaning the scribe intended. This is where our silent heroes, the determinatives, come rushing back into play. The word for morn would almost certainly be followed by the determinative of a man with a hand to his face, indicating grief or sadness. The word for fortress, however, would be followed by the determinative for a town or an enclosure, a wall with battlements. The determinative acts as the crucial referee, resolving the ambiguity that the homophones created. But the challenge deepens with the concept of polyvalency. This is where a single hieroglyphic sign, a single picture, can represent multiple different sounds or ideas. It's not merely a letter with one job, it's a multi-tool in the scribe's kit. A classic example is the hieroglyph of a hoe. Primarily, this sign was a biliteral, representing the two consonants M and R. It was used in the word Mr. meaning hoe or to love, but this same hoe symbol could also function as a uniliteral, representing just the single consonant H. Furthermore, in certain contexts, it could even be an ideogram, directly meaning the tool itself without any phonetic component. So the humble hoe sign could be a sound part of a sound or a direct concept, and its role in any given word is entirely dependent on the signs that surround it. This polyvalent nature means that decoding is never a simple one-to-one substitution. You cannot look at a sign in isolation and assign it a fixed value. You must constantly look at its neighbors, its position in the word, and the overarching context of the entire inscription. The hieroglyph of a mouth can represent the sound R, but it can also be the word for mouth itself. The owl is most commonly the sound M, but it is also the word for owl. The scribes employed clever techniques to guide the reader. They often used what we call phonetic complements, where they would write a biliteral sign and then reinforce its final sound by adding the uniliteral sign for that same sound. It was a built-in pronunciation and clarification guide, a way of saying, just in case you were wondering, this ho sign is being used for its R sound here. This intricate system of homophones and polyvalent signs wasn't a bug in the Egyptian writing system. It was a feature. It allowed for incredible density of meaning and a love of puns and double entendres that the educated elite would have appreciated. A royal text could be read on multiple levels, with a surface meaning for the general public and a deeper, more symbolic meaning for the priests and court officials. It transformed writing from a mere recording tool into an intellectual and artistic pursuit. For us, the modern decoders, it demands a shift from mechanical translation to thoughtful interpretation. It requires us to hold multiple possibilities in our mind at once, to test each potential meaning against the context, and to listen carefully for the echoes of a language that delighted in the playful, powerful connections between a word's sound and its soul. The dusty excavation sites and crowded museum archives of the past have undergone a digital revolution, transforming the way we approach the ancient script. While the fundamental principles of decipherment remain, modern Egyptologists are now armed with an array of technological tools that would have seemed like pure magic to Champollion. This isn't about replacing the human mind and its intuitive leaps. It's about augmenting our capabilities, allowing us to see patterns across continents and centuries that would otherwise remain hidden in plain sight. The process has shifted from a solitary scholar squinting at a papyrus by lamplight to a global, collaborative effort powered by silicon and light. One of the most powerful advancements is the creation of vast digital epigraphic databases. Projects like the Thesaurus Linguae Egyptiae and the online Rosetta Stone allow researchers to instantly cross-reference a hieroglyphic sign or a phrase from a temple in Luxor with every other known instance of it across the entire corpus of Egyptian text. Imagine the decades of labor it would have taken a 19th century scholar to manually find all occurrences of a specific rare glyph. Today, a researcher can type a query and receive results in milliseconds, tracing the evolution of a sign's form or a word's meaning over thousands of years. This computational power enables a form of linguistic pattern recognition on a massive scale, helping to confirm tentative translations or identify previously unrecognized grammatical constructions by analyzing huge datasets of known text. When it comes to damaged or weathered inscriptions, technology acts as a digital time machine. The use of reflectance transformation imaging, or RTI, has been nothing short of revolutionary. This technique involves taking dozens of high-resolution photographs of an inscribed surface, each with light projected from a different angle. Specialized software then combines these images, allowing an Egyptologist to virtually manipulate the light source across the surface of the text. They can highlight subtle scratches and grooves that are completely invisible to the naked eye, effectively revealing signs that have been worn smooth by time or intentionally defaced. For texts on crumbling papyrus, multispectral imaging uses light from beyond the visible spectrum to see through soot stains and even the ink on the other side of the scroll, recovering texts once thought lost forever. Perhaps the most futuristic tool in the arsenal is three-dimensional scanning. Laser scanners and photogrammetry create incredibly precise 3D models of inscriptions, tomb walls, and even entire temples. These models are more than just pretty pictures. They are measurable, interactive records that can be studied from anywhere in the world. A scholar in Berlin can virtually fly through a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, taking measurements of a cartouche or examining the depth of a chisel mark without ever boarding a plane. This is crucial for preservation, creating a perfect digital copy of monuments threatened by tourism, pollution, or rising groundwater. Furthermore, these 3D models can be used to physically reconstruct damaged artifacts through 3D printing, allowing fragments held in different museums to be digitally and sometimes physically united for the first time in centuries. The latest frontier involves artificial intelligence and machine learning. While still in its early stages, AI is being trained to recognize and classify hieroglyphic signs with astonishing speed and accuracy. Think of it as an automated, superhuman epigrapher. An AI model can be fed thousands of images of a specific sign, learning every possible variant in its shape and style across different time periods and surfaces. Once trained, it can then scan through millions of pixels of temple wall or papyrus, identifying and cataloging every instance of that sign. This doesn't just save time, it removes human bias and the potential for oversight, ensuring that even the faintest or most unusual glyph is logged for study. Some projects are even experimenting with AI that can suggest probable translations or completions for broken texts, much like the predictive text on your phone, but for the language of the pharaohs. This technological leap has also democratized the decoding challenge, making it more accessible than ever before. Amateur enthusiasts and students no longer need a world-class library or a grant to travel to Egypt. High-resolution images of the Rosetta Stone and countless other artifacts are available for free online. Interactive applications and software packages now offer user-friendly platforms for budding Egyptologists to practice translating basic inscriptions from their own homes. Online communities and forums allow people from all over the world to collaborate on tricky passages, crowdsourcing solutions, and sharing discoveries. The sacred words of the god, once the exclusive domain of a privileged few, are now available for anyone with curiosity and an internet connection to explore, ensuring that the voices of ancient Egypt will continue to be heard and understood by generations to come. Now that you've seen how the code was cracked, let's put that knowledge into practice and try your hand at some basic deciphering yourself. This is where the journey moves from theory to tangible experience, and you get to feel the thrill of connecting with an ancient system of writing. We're going to focus on the core building blocks, the uniliteral signs, which are the hieroglyphs that represent a single consonant sound. Think of this as the essential alphabet the Egyptian scribes used as the foundation for spelling out words. It's important to remember that this isn't a perfect one-to-one match with our modern English alphabet. The ancient Egyptian language had different sounds, and their writing system didn't include vowels the way ours does. So we'll be working primarily with consonant sounds, which means your decoded name might sound a little abbreviated, but that's exactly how the ancient Egyptians would have written it. Let's meet some of the key characters in this visual alphabet. For the A sound, like in car, they use the vulture hieroglyph. It's a simple, elegant drawing that might look a bit like a sideways chevron. The B sound, as in bat, was represented by a low, flat foot. For a hard C or K sound, they used the basket with the handle. The CH sound, as in chip, is interesting. It was often shown as a placenta or a sieve, though simpler resources might use a hobble for animals. The D sound came from a hand, not a whole hand, but just the part with the fingers. A double reed leaf stood in for the E sound, or the letter I and Y when used as a vowel. The horned viper, a coiled snake, was the sign for the F sound. A jar stand, which looks a bit like a small table, represented the G sound, as in go. The H sound came from a twisted wick of flax, resembling a loose spiral. This pattern continues for other sounds. A shelter or reed hut provided the H sound, as in house. The J sound could be represented by a snake, though it's not as common. The M sound is one of the most recognizable, the owl. You'll see this wise-looking bird everywhere. Water, shown as a single ripple or a zigzag line, was the sign for N. The P sound was a small, square stool. The Q sound was a subtle slope or a hill. The R sound was the mouth, a simple curve. A folded cloth, which looks a bit like a bolt of fabric, stood for the S sound. The SH sound was a pool of water. The T sound was a simple, round loaf of bread. Finally, the TH sound was represented by a hand with the thumb outstretched, almost like a hitchhiking gesture. Here's your first interactive challenge. Take a piece of paper and try to spell out your name using this basic sound guide. Remember, we're only using consonants. Let's use a classic example, Elizabeth. We break it down to its consonant skeleton, ELABTH. Now we find the hieroglyphs for those sounds. For the L, we use the lion. The Z isn't a direct sound, so we might use the door bolt, which is like an S but can be adapted. The B is the foot, the T is the loaf of bread. And the H is the twisted flax. You wouldn't worry about the vowels E, I, or A. The ancient scribes would have understood the name from its consonant framework. They might even add a determinative at the end, like the seated woman, to clarify that this name belongs to a female. As you try this, you'll quickly discover a few things. First, it's a fantastic exercise in active learning, making you engage with the symbols rather than just observing them. Second, you'll gain a deep appreciation for the scribes who had to memorize hundreds of these signs and know exactly when to use a uniliteral, a biliteral, or a logogram. It's a puzzle, and arranging your hieroglyphs in a small, balanced rectangle to look aesthetically pleasing is part of the fun. You aren't just writing, you're creating a miniature piece of art, a personal cartouche that would make any ancient Egyptian smile. This hands-on practice bridges the gap of millennia, transforming abstract symbols on a screen into your own modern message, written in one of history's most beautiful and enduring scripts. All right, let's put all this theory into practice with a real-world example. I want you to feel what it's like to stand in front of an ancient artifact and actually read it. On your screen now is a photograph of a small funerary stela, a tombstone if you will, that would have been placed in a modest offering chapel. It's not the grand proclamation of a pharaoh. This is about an ordinary person, and that makes it all the more powerful. Our goal is to read the central offering formula, the prayer that ensured this individual would have food and drink for eternity. Don't worry, we'll tackle this together, one step at a time. The very first thing we must do is figure out which way to read. Remember our rule, find the animals and read into their faces, scan the hieroglyphs. Do you see the bird there near the top? It's a quail chick, and it's looking to the left. That's our compass. This means we start on the left and read towards the right. The text is organized in horizontal lines, so we'll work our way from the top left, moving right, and then drop down to the next line. It seems straightforward, but getting the direction wrong would scramble the entire meaning, so this is our crucial starting point. Now, let's look at the first group of signs on the top left. We see a triangular shape, something that looks like a little shelter, and then that quail chick we spotted earlier. We need to sound these out using our uniliteral alphabet. The triangle is a loaf of bread, which we know represents the T sound. The shelter is a reed hut, which is the H sound. And the quail chick is the W sound and also the U sound. So putting those together, we get something like THW. Now, that might not mean anything immediately, but this is where our knowledge of common phrases comes in. This combination, THW, is the root of the verb to offer or to present. We've just sounded out our first word. The next sign is a flag flying from a pole. This is a biliteral sign representing two consonants, N and TR. It's the word for God, but look closely at what follows it. We see a glyph of a seated man. This isn't a sound, this is a determinative. It's classifying the word that came before it. The NTR word, meaning God, is being specified as a male god by this determinative. So the phrase so far is an offering which the god gives, but which god, the text continues. We see an arm holding a stick, which is the K sound. Then a water ripple, which is N, and then a loaf of bread, which is T. This spells K and T. That doesn't ring a bell, but remember, the vowels are missing. This is likely the name of a god, and from our knowledge of mythology, this is probably Kenti, a name for Osiris as the foremost of the Westerners, the lord of the afterlife. The determinative confirms this. It's the seated god with the divine beard. So our sentence is growing, an offering which the god Osiris gives. Now we arrive at the most important part, the beneficiary. We see a phrase that begins with the D sound, represented by a hand, then the I sound, shown by a double reed leaf. This is the verb D, which means to give. But who is doing the giving? It's the god. And what is he giving for? The next sign is a tall, rectangular object with a curved top. This is the PR sign, meaning house, estate, but in this context, it's part of a prepositional phrase. It leads into the name of the deceased, and there it is encircled not in a royal cartouche, but set apart nonetheless. We see the name, a horned viper for the F sound, a reed leaf for the I sound, and a door bolt for the S sound. FIS, this is the name Phis, and right after his name, the scribe placed the determinative for a man, a seated figure, clarifying that Phis is the male person receiving this offering. The full prayer now comes together, an offering which Osiris gives, so that he may give an invocation offering of bread and beer to the ka of Phis. That single, simple line of text is a direct conversation with eternity. We haven't just decoded sounds, we fulfilled an ancient wish. Every time we read that phrase aloud, we are, in a way, reactivating its magic, providing sustenance for the soul of a man named Phis who lived and died thousands of years ago. He wanted to be remembered, and thanks to this stone and your effort to read it, he finally is. Even with the best intentions and a solid grasp of the alphabet, every new decoder is bound to stumble into a few classic traps. The journey from recognizing signs to truly reading sentences is paved with common mistakes, but the good news is that they are all wonderfully avoidable once you know what to look for. One of the most frequent errors is confusing visually similar hieroglyphs. The script is full of signs that, to an untrained eye, can look nearly identical, but represent completely different sounds or ideas. For instance, consider the hieroglyph for a mouth, which is a simple curved line representing the R sound, and the hieroglyph for a basket with a handle, which is a K sound. At a quick glance, especially in a weathered inscription, that curve can be mistaken for the basket's handle. Another classic mix-up is between the owl, which is an M, and the glyph for a hill slope, which represents a Q sound. Both can appear as somewhat triangular shapes, but the owl has distinctive ears and facial features, while the hill is a more uniform, gentle slope. The key to overcoming this is to study these sign families in isolation. Create flashcards for pairs that look alike and drill yourself on their distinguishing features. Was that a vulture for a sound or a quail chick for a W? The vulture is more angular and has a distinct beak, while the quail chick is plumper and often drawn in profile. This focused practice builds the visual literacy needed to tell them apart at a glance. A far more significant, and often more tempting, pitfall is the urge to ignore determinatives, or worse, to try and sound them out. After spending so much time memorizing phonetic values, it's only natural to want to assign a sound to every single symbol you see. But remember, determinatives are the silent guides. Treating that seated man at the end of a word as if it should be pronounced will lead you down a path of complete nonsense. For example, you might successfully sound out the consonants S, N, and T for the word S&T, which means sister. If you then try to assign a value to the woman determinative that follows it, you've derailed your own translation. The determinative is there to confirm the word's category, in this case, a female person, not to be spoken. The best practice is to make a habit of scanning to the end of a word group first. Identify that final, silent symbol before you even begin your phonetic breakdown. Let it tell you what kind of word you're looking for. If you see the papyrus scroll determinative, you know you're dealing with an abstract concept. If you see the walking legs, you're looking at a verb of motion. This simple step of reading the context clue first will prevent countless errors and dramatically speed up your comprehension. Another common source of frustration is getting the direction of reading wrong. It might seem like a basic step, but in a dense inscription where animals are small or facing an unusual direction, it's easy to accidentally start reading from the wrong end. This will, of course, scramble the entire order of the signs and make any translation attempt impossible. Always take that extra moment to find an animal or a human figure and note which way it is facing. That is your true north. If the text is organized in vertical columns, the rule still applies. The animal faces toward the beginning of the column. Making a small pencil mark on a copy of the text or a mental note before you begin can save you from minutes of confusion. Perhaps the most strategic error beginners make is aiming too high too soon. It's incredibly exciting to want to translate a long, complex hymn from a temple wall, but that's a surefire way to become overwhelmed and discouraged. This is where the wisdom of the early decipherers becomes your roadmap. Follow their lead and start with what is easiest. Royal names, cartouches are your training wheels. They are clearly marked, often contain familiar sounds from the Greek names we know, and provide an immense sense of accomplishment. Find an image of the Rosetta Stone or a temple relief, and practice identifying and sounding out the cartouches for Ptolemy and Cleopatra. Then move on to Ramesses and Thutmose. This builds confidence and reinforces your phonetic alphabet in a practical, rewarding way. From there, move to short funerary inscriptions. These often contain standardized offering formulas with predictable vocabulary. You'll quickly learn to spot words like hedep offering, d to give, and ankh life. Using a known vocabulary list for these common funerary texts allows you to practice reading full sentences without having to look up every other word. Finally, embrace the tools available to you, but don't become enslaved by them. It's tempting to use a digital hieroglyphic keyboard to spell out a word and get an instant translation, but this bypasses the critical learning process. Instead, use resources like sign lists and dictionaries as verificatory tools, not as crutches. Try to sound out a word yourself first, make a guess at its meaning based on the determinative, and then check your work against a reliable source. This active struggle is where real learning happens. It's the difference between being told the answer and discovering it for yourself. By starting small, reading the signs not just for their sound, but for their silent meaning, and building your skills on the sturdy foundation of royal names and common phrases, you'll gradually develop the intuition and confidence to tackle even the most enigmatic of inscription. Now that you've mastered the basics, it's time to step onto the monumental stage, the vast sun-baked walls of a royal temple like Karnak. Here, the inscriptions are not just funerary prayers. They are complex narratives filled with divine epithets, historical bombast, and sophisticated wordplay. Translating a passage from such a source is the ultimate test of your decoding skills. Requiring more than just a sign list, it demands strategy, patience, and a willingness to sit comfortably with ambiguity. Let's walk through the process together with a realistic example, a celebratory text from the reign of a great pharaoh. Imagine you're faced with a horizontal line of beautifully carved hieroglyphs, above a relief of a king smiting his enemies. The first step is always orientation. Find the animals. You spot a serpent and a vulture, both facing to the right. This means you start on the right and read left. Now you begin to sound out the first group of signs. You see the horned viper for the F sound, the arm for the K sound, and the water ripple for the N sound. FKN, that doesn't immediately ring a bell. This is where many beginners panic, but the seasoned decoder takes a breath and looks for context. This is a royal text about war, so perhaps this is a foreign name. You remember that the Egyptians often wrote the names of their enemies using approximate phonetic spellings. FKN could very well be a rendering of a Libyan or Syrian chieftain's name, something like Fekhan. You might not find it in a dictionary, so you make a note and move on, accepting that some proper nouns will remain fuzzy. The next sign is a determinative not for a god or an Egyptian, but for a foreign enemy, often a hieroglyph of a bound captive or a throw stick, the symbol for foreign land. This confirms your hypothesis. You are looking at the name of a defeated foe. The sentence likely begins with the pharaoh smiting or defeating this individual. You continue reading left. You encounter a phrase you recognize: the arm holding a stick for K, the quail chick for W, and the bread loaf for T, KWT. In a military context, this is a common word for to overthrow or to cut down. Your translation is taking shape. The pharaoh smote Fekhan, but who is the subject? You continue further left and find a grand cartouche. You sound it out: the sun disk for R, the owl for M, the folded cloth for S, and another folded cloth for S. RMSS, it's Ramesses. The subject of the sentence is the great Ramesses II. Now the pieces click into place. The full opening reads, Ramesses smote Fekhan, a triumphant declaration of royal power. This process of working from the known to the unknown, using the clear cartouche to anchor the sentence, and then deciphering the less certain words around it, is the core strategy for tackling complex passages. Another powerful technique is leveraging your knowledge of standardized phrases. The Egyptians loved formulaic expressions, especially in royal text. If you see the hieroglyph for a sickle, meaning to cut, followed by the determinative for a head with blood flowing from it, you know you're dealing with the gruesome phrase to cut off the heads of the enemies. If you see the sign for a bow, meaning to bend, followed by the determinative of a man with his arms bound, it translates to subdue. These stock phrases are like familiar landmarks in an unfamiliar terrain. Recognizing them allows you to navigate the text with greater confidence and speed, even if some of the adjacent words are still unclear. When you hit a wall with a completely unknown word, your first resource should be a sign list or a dictionary, but use it strategically. Don't just look for the first sign, look for the core biliteral or triliteral sign in the word. In our hypothetical word, FKN, you would look under the F sound in your dictionary to see if any common words starting with those consonants fit the military context. If that fails, the next best step is to consult scholarly resources. This doesn't mean giving up, it means learning from the experts. Websites like the Thesaurus Linguae Egyptiae or academic publications can show you how a word has been translated in other, similar inscriptions. Perhaps FKN appears in a list of conquered cities from another temple, allowing you to identify it as a specific place name. This collaborative aspect, standing on the shoulders of the Egyptologists who came before you, is an essential part of the decipherment process. Finally, embrace the fact that a perfect word-for-word translation is often impossible and sometimes less desirable than capturing the spirit and intent of the text. The ancient Egyptian language was highly elusive and poetic. A phrase like "his fear precedes him like a flame" doesn't need to be dissected word by word. Its meaning is powerfully clear in its entirety. Your goal is to become a sensitive interpreter, not just a mechanical translator. By combining phonetic decoding, contextual analysis, a familiarity with common phrases, and a respectful use of scholarly work, you transform from a student of signs into a true reader, capable of hearing the majestic and complex voice of pharaonic power as it was meant to be heard. This process of translation does far more than simply convert ancient symbols into modern words. It fundamentally rewrites our understanding of human history. For centuries, Our view of ancient Egypt was filtered through the accounts of Greek and Roman historians, who offered an outsider's perspective, often focused on the grandiose and the exotic. They saw the pyramids and the mummies, but they missed the soul of the civilization. Deciphering hieroglyphs changed all of that. It gave Egypt back its own voice, allowing us to hear the stories not from distant observers, but from the people who lived them. We moved from seeing the Egyptians as a mysterious, monolithic culture, obsessed with death, to understanding them as complex individuals with a rich inner world, a sophisticated legal system, a vibrant economy, and a deep, nuanced relationship with their gods. Each word we successfully decode acts as a tiny, shimmering thread, weaving a connection across an unimaginable gulf of time. When we read the name Ramesses carved into a temple pylon, we are not just identifying a pharaoh, we are acknowledging the ambition of a ruler who wanted his legacy to endure for eternity. When we translate a humble tax receipt on a piece of pottery, we are peering over the shoulder of a scribe in a dusty office 3,000 years ago, worrying about the grain yield from a nearby village. A love poem discovered on a papyrus scroll reveals the same anxieties and passions we feel today: the fear of rejection, the joy of reciprocated affection, the use of natural metaphors to describe beauty. These are not abstract historical data points. They are intimate human moments, frozen in ink and stone, waiting for us to rediscover them and recognize our shared humanity. This linguistic breakthrough also completely reshaped our comprehension of Egyptian religion and philosophy. Before decipherment, the numerous gods and goddesses appeared as a bewildering, almost chaotic pantheon of animal-headed deities. But reading the hymns and funerary texts revealed a sophisticated and coherent cosmology. We learned that the Egyptians grappled with profound questions about the nature of existence, the creation of the universe, and the meaning of a righteous life. The concept of Mat, encompassing truth, justice, and cosmic order, emerged as the central pillar of their entire society, guiding everything from pharaonic law to personal ethics. The Book of the Dead was not a book of spells in a superstitious sense, but an intricate guide for the soul's journey through the afterlife, filled with moral tests and declarations of innocence that underscored a deep belief in a final judgment. Decoding these texts showed us a people deeply concerned with morality, balance, and their place within a divine universe. Perhaps the most profound impact has been on our knowledge of daily life, moving beyond the tombs and temples to the streets and homes of ordinary people. The vast majority of surviving hieratic texts on papyrus are not religious scrolls, but administrative documents, letters, wills, and medical manuals. From these, we have reconstructed the intricate details of their world. We know the price of a loaf of bread, the legal rights of women in marriage and divorce, the treatment for a sprained ankle, and the complaints of workers who went on strike because their rations were delayed. We have schoolboy exercises where a young scribe practiced his writing by copying proverbs, and we even have his teacher's corrections scrawled in the margin. This is the stuff of history that truly breathes. It tells us not just about kings and conquests, but about the rhythm of daily existence, the worries of a family, and the laughter shared among friends. Every decoded word, whether it's the name of a god or a notation for a jar of honey, is a direct, unbroken link to a person who thought, loved, worked, and dreamed under the same sun that rises over us today. So you're feeling inspired and ready to take your first steps into decoding hieroglyphs yourself. The wonderful news is that you don't need to book a flight to Cairo or gain access to a university library to begin this adventure. An incredible wealth of resources is available right at your fingertips, designed for every learning style and level of commitment. Let's start with the foundational tools, the books that can serve as your personal tutors. For a truly immersive and practical introduction, you can't go wrong with How to Read Egyptian Hieroglyphs by Mark Collier and Bill Manley. This book is widely regarded as the modern standard for beginners. It doesn't just teach you signs, it drops you straight into real inscriptions, building your skills through hands-on practice from the very first chapter. If you're looking for something a bit more structured with workbook-style exercises, James Allen's Middle Egyptian is a comprehensive, if more academic, journey into the language itself. And for a beautiful visual companion that helps you connect the signs to their meanings, The Egyptian Hieroglyphic Dictionary by Budge, though dated in its scholarship, remains an invaluable resource for its extensive sign lists and translation. Of course, the digital world offers dynamic and interactive ways to learn that Champollion could never have imagined. If you thrive with guided, video-based instruction, there are exceptional online courses available. Many major universities now offer Egyptology courses through platforms like Coursera and edX, often taught by leading professors in the field. For a more dedicated hieroglyphic focus, look for specialized modules that break down grammar and vocabulary into digestible weekly lessons. When it comes to software, remember that powerful tools are now just a download away. JSesh is a free, open-source hieroglyphic editor that is a favorite among enthusiasts and professionals alike. It allows you to type in transliteration, that is, the Roman alphabet version of Egyptian words, and it will automatically convert it into beautifully rendered hieroglyphs, helping you visualize how words are constructed. For a more all-in-one digital experience, consider applications like Hieroglyphic Pro or Glyphwrite, which often combine dictionaries, sign lists, and typing functions into a single user-friendly package. To truly test your growing skills, nothing beats practicing with real-world artifacts, and you can do this from your own home thanks to the digitization efforts of the world's great museums. The British Museum's online collection is a treasure trove. You can pull up high-resolution images of the Rosetta Stone and zoom in on every single character, practicing your identification of the hieroglyphic, Demotic, and Greek section. The Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and the Louvre in Paris also have vast portions of their Egyptian collections available online, complete with photographs and curatorial descriptions that provide excellent context for the inscriptions you're studying. For a more structured decoding challenge, seek out websites like Digital Egypt or Thesaurus Linguae Egyptii, which offer searchable corpora of text. You can look up a specific monument and often find the inscription, a transliteration, and a translation, allowing you to check your work against that of leading Egyptologists. Ultimately, the most rewarding resource might be the community of fellow enthusiasts. Online forums, such as those on Reddit or dedicated Egyptology groups, are filled with people at all stages of their journey, from curious beginners to professional academics. Don't be afraid to post a photograph of an inscription you're struggling with and ask for help. You'll often find that others are thrilled to guide you through the process. This journey of decipherment is a continuous path of discovery, and each new sign you learn, each new word you sound out, is a personal triumph that connects you directly to the scribes and storytellers of ancient Egypt. The keys to their world have been found and are now waiting for you to pick them up and begin unlocking its secrets for yourself. What an incredible journey we have taken together, from the silent, mysterious symbols carved into temple walls to the triumphant moment of hearing an ancient name spoken aloud for the first time in millennia. We started with the foundational discovery of the Rosetta Stone, that miraculous key that provided the first parallel texts, and we followed the brilliant, painstaking work of scholars like Champollion, who dared to believe that these beautiful pictures could represent sound. We learned to distinguish between logograms, phonograms, and those all-important silent determinatives that act as the semantic guides for every word. We ventured beyond stone into the cursive world of hieratic on papyrus, heard the whispers of everyday people, and finally, we even tried our own hand at sounding out a royal carta. This wasn't just about learning a language. It was about unlocking a mindset, a worldview, and connecting with the hopes and dreams of an entire civilization. This story of decipherment is a powerful testament to human curiosity and perseverance. It's a chain of discovery that stretches from a soldier's chance find in the Egyptian dirt to the most advanced digital imaging technology in a modern lab. It connects the intuitive leap of a French linguist to the computational power of artificial intelligence trained to recognize a falcon's wing or a serpent's coil. Each step built upon the last, from the early, misguided symbolic interpretations to the precise phonetic alphabet we can use today, and the most beautiful part. This story is still being written. With every new archaeological dig, every newly scanned papyrus, and every fragment digitally reunited with another in a museum across the world. We are adding new words, new phrases, and new voices to our understanding of ancient Egypt. You are now part of that story, so I want to offer you a sincere congratulations. You have gained more than just facts. You have gained a new lens through which to see history. The next time you see a photograph of a tomb wall or a museum artifact, you won't just see abstract art, you'll see a structured language. You might spot a cartouche and sound out the name within it. You'll recognize the owl as an M sound and understand that the seated man at the end of a word is a silent clue, not a letter to be pronounced. These skills transform you from a passive observer into an active participant in one of history's greatest detective stories. I would absolutely love to hear about your own decoding adventures. If you tried spelling your name in hieroglyphs, share it in the comments below. If you found a particularly interesting inscription online and managed to decipher a part of it, tell us about your process. This is a community of curiosity, and every attempt is a victory. And if this journey down the Nile has whetted your appetite for linguistic puzzles, know that there are so many other ancient scripts waiting for their own Rosetta Stone moment. You could dive into The Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, the cuneiform of Mesopotamia, which is used to write the even older language of Sumerian, or perhaps the elegant linear B script of the Mycenaean Greeks, which is itself deciphered in another breathtaking intellectual saga. The world is full of undeciphered codes and lost languages, each one holding the potential to reveal another forgotten chapter of our shared human history. Keep that curiosity alive, keep looking for the patterns, and never stop listening for the whispers from the past.